What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this is Samsung's A55, their awesome mid-range smartphone that they really don't want you to buy. I know that sounds ridiculous. I mean, why would a company make a product they don't want customers to have? Well, because way too many people have opted for this tier of smartphone, the A50 somethings, instead of spending $1,000 on an S series flagship, like Samsung actually wants you to do. And this isn't like some assumption. I'm not making a clickbaity controversial statement just to get views. Samsung basically said this when they were asked why the A55 wasn't coming to the US this year. Consumers can still take advantage of our Galaxy innovation at great value with the S23 and S23 FE, they say. Now, look, I'll be the first to tell you that getting last year's flagship, like the S23, at a discount is always a great idea. Except Samsung is trying to sell you last year's flagship for $700. And the FE, well, they can't even give that phone away. It's $100 off right now. The great value is and always has been with the A series. I mean, year over year, it's some combination of the cheap and mid-tier A series phones that are not just Samsung's best sellers, but some of the best-selling Android devices overall, worldwide. And this year's A55, at an unofficial price of well under $400, is far and away the best Samsung phone you can get once again, if you can get it at all. The reason this phone is so good isn't just because it has a bold, bright 120Hz AMOLED display, or a bigger battery, or the premium all-glass and aluminum build now, or any other spec in particular. It's actually because the higher tier S series phones, including the current S24, just aren't that much better than this phone now. Like, on the surface, the flagship S24 has nearly the same display as this phone, basically the same build. It can be optioned with the same RAM and storage. It has almost the same main camera lens, the same fast charging speeds, and yet it's supposed to be more than twice the price? What Samsung doesn't realize, in my opinion, is that the reason people keep choosing an A-series phone like this one isn't because they keep releasing good A-series phones, it's because their top-tier S-series phones just haven't been enticing new and existing customers at all for like the last 2 or 3 years. And not releasing this A55 in the US isn't going to motivate people to buy an S series or an FE. It seems to be motivating people to buy an even cheaper phone, like the A35 or the A15, which are widely available and are both great values in their own right. Also, if you want to buy this A55 and you live in the US or some other region where Samsung didn't officially release it, you still can. Although it's not going to be found on Samsung's website or from any carriers, Samsung literally sells it on Amazon as a GSM unlocked device compatible with some US networks. This is their actual Amazon storefront, and plenty of third-party retailers like Wireless Place, for example, sell it too. You'll need to use it on a compatible GSM network like T-Mobile or Mint or channel-sponsored Tello. You can check the network bands ahead of time, but there's nothing that's actually stopping you from buying and enjoying one of Samsung's best devices, even if Samsung themselves don't want you having one. If you do end up with an A55, it's a really great phone. In previous years, Samsung kept the build cheap for the A series, plastic backs, plastic frames, but this year, the A55 is all glass and aluminum, so when you hold it in your hand, it feels exactly like the S24 or the S23 FE. The front display is even covered in Gorilla Glass Victus Plus now, so this is absolutely a flagship build through and through. And it feels heavier and nicer than the A35, which also has a glass back, but with a lighter plastic frame. If you were ever put off by the idea of a cheap plastic budget phone or were self-conscious about people thinking you had a cheap Android, literally no one is going to think that this isn't the latest S series. At 6.6 inches, the phone is also bigger than the regular S24. It's also bigger than the S23 FE. It's nearly the same size as the much more expensive S24 Plus, so you get a ton of screen for a fraction of the price. The black borders framing that display are much more obvious than the flagship phones, but it seems like not a ton of people care about that as long as they're even and still sort of slim. And I feel like this phone has a good enough screen to body ratio for what it is. One big advantage you still get in opting for an A series is expandable storage. The A55 still has a physical SIM card slot that supports 2 SIM cards or a SIM card and a MicroSD card. You can get this phone with either 128 or 256 gigabytes of storage, which isn't bad, but popping in a 512 gigabyte SD card whenever you need to for $30 is just so convenient. And people often say, well, a MicroSD card is slow, or you can't move your apps over to it anymore, really. But I say, if I could at least dump a few hundred pictures or videos on an SD card or bigger files or documents, that's worth it, since I don't have to rely on some cloud subscription service like all these companies want you to use nowadays. The A55 doesn't have a headphone jack anymore, even though there's plenty of space for one at the top and bottom of the phone. But hey, Samsung has Galaxy Buds they need to sell you, I guess. You do get an in-display fingerprint sensor though, which is kind of premium, and this is generally pretty good, but if you're used to the fast ultrasonic sensors on other Android flagships, it'll feel a little more inconsistent by comparison, but there's nothing wrong with it. And with Face Unlock, you can get into the phone fast enough either way. So I'm going to double down on a semi-controversial statement I made earlier. The display on this A55 is basically the same as what you get on the current S24 flagship, but let me explain. The high-level screen specs, as told to the average consumer, are in a sense the same. You get a Super AMOLED panel that's bold, bright, and colorful. It's a full HD 2340 by 1080 resolution that's sharp and crisp. It's a 120 Hz refresh rate, so it's silky smooth visually and lightning fast with your swipes and taps. It's covered in Gorilla Glass Victus Plus to cut down on glare and be a little tougher too if you drop it. To most anyone who compares this to the S24, this has it all and then some. But if you want to get nitpicky, the A55 isn't as bright as the S series. And I think you can tell. You're still going to battle a bit of glare, both due to the 1000 nits of max brightness on this phone versus the 2600 nits you'd get on a flagship phone. And the S series also has better Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which I've noticed cuts down on glare a lot more. The AMOLED panel inside the S series is also newer and better. It's just a higher tier of product. The 1080 resolution, though, is the same, at least until you jump up to the S24 Plus, which offers a quad HD display. And the 120 Hz refresh rate, I'll call that the same too. So to the spec-conscious tech folks who were half writing a hate comment already, there you go. This isn't the exact same display as an S series, but it's darn near close enough, especially for like 95% of people who, let's be honest, watch YouTube videos at a default 480 resolution and who can't tell the difference between 60 and 120 Hz anyway. To the few people who truly care about very particular screen specs, you can go and get the S24 Plus or the S24 Ultra. Those are the phones for you. But for everyone else, the A55 has as good of a viewing experience as something twice the price. And that's been the case for years now. It's not even anything new. The screen has always been one of my top reasons for recommending a mid-tier A-series phone, and the A55 further cements that recommendation. Samsung understands that the screen is what you look at the entire time you use the phone. It is the essence of the smartphone, so it should be good, and it really is good on the A55. What's also quite good is the speaker setup. Granted, I don't think Samsung has done anything in particular with the speakers on their phones in quite some time, especially the cheaper A series. But having 2 loudspeakers for out loud listening, like so many people use nowadays, is pretty nice. So one stigma that a lot of recent A-series and even some S-series Samsung phones have been unable to shake is that when powered by Samsung's own Exynos processor, some people feel that the phone performs poorly. Now, this is, in my opinion, heavily user specific. Like if you just browse Instagram and YouTube and text your friends and snap some pictures, it really doesn't matter what's inside your phone. But if you're playing Call of Duty Mobile for 3 or 4 hours straight, the Exynos processor will heat up and choke itself out. If you're somewhere in the middle, not quite a competitive gamer, but you use your phone a lot throughout the day for a lot of different stuff, this is probably where a previous year flagship starts to make some sense value-wise. But I think even the largest subset of people who may be hindered specifically by an Exynos chip is only like 5 to 10% of the customer base, if that. And it's been very obvious in my comment section that those folks have likely sworn off Samsung's Exynos brand for good anyway. For everyone else, this is a great phone performance-wise. And here's the current Geekbench scores if you want to compare this phone to something else you might have. Me personally, I don't really experience anything outright negative with the Exynos processor that's in this phone, the Exynos 1480. It's a relatively recent and improved chipset that addressed some of the performance woes of previous mid and upper tier Samsung SoCs. Considering you also get 8 gigabytes of RAM too, I think collectively this phone is perfectly fine performance-wise. And the bigger thing for me is just the fact that Samsung says they're committed to supporting this phone for the long run. 4 years of Android updates this phone is going to get and 5 years of security patches. That's great. That means you can fork over the $400 or so for this phone and not feel like you're missing out on anything for quite a while. Or even better, wait a year or two to buy this when it's even cheaper and it'll still have some life left ahead. All in all, I think if you're anti-Exynos, you're never going to buy this phone anyway. Enjoy your Snapdragon S series or a MediaTek device from a different brand. I know those companies make better, more reliable internal components. We all know that. But for everyone else, it doesn't really matter what's powering this phone. What matters most is you're getting the full-featured Samsung and Android experience with years of updates ahead for a fraction of the price of a flagship. And even if you never get those new Galaxy AI features, that's okay, because you probably wouldn't use them anyway. One thing that's not immediately obvious about the A55 is the fact that it actually has a bigger sized battery than all the other phones Samsung wants you to buy instead. At 5,000 milliamps, it's significantly bigger than the 4,000 milliamps found inside this smaller regular S24. And for some reason, the S23 FE only got a 4,500 milliamp battery. So you've got a bit more capacity. And I know what people are already typing. The crappy Exynos chip is going to kill the battery faster anyway. And yeah, that may be true for some people, but I think for a vast majority of average everyday users, this is an all-day device with no worries. That's been my experience with this, and every previous A-series phone with this size battery for that matter, Exynos or not. And with support for 20-watt charging speeds, you can juice up pretty quickly too. It's a bit of a bummer, honestly, that this phone didn't get wireless charging, considering it has nearly everything else. But I suppose Samsung can't give you everything you want. Finally, something I'm usually quick to criticize on a budget or mid-tier device is the camera setup. Flagship phones have pulled so far ahead of the $300 devices that there's usually no comparison. But honestly, the hardware and the actual pictures you get with the A55 are probably good enough to fool most people into thinking they were taken on a flagship. Around back, you get 2 useful lenses, a 50 megapixel main, which on paper looks the same as the S24, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide, which is very useful. The third lens is a 5 megapixel macro, which always feels like an unnecessary add-on. Like even the cheapest telephoto lens in the world would have rounded out a perfect camera setup. But I think Samsung just has to have the illusion of 3 lenses or more in order to look premium. The selfie camera has a lot of megapixels, 32, but that doesn't really mean anything. And like always, there are a few standout features and functions like 4K video recording and 50 megapixel picture mode that are the little extras that make you feel like there's something more to this camera setup. And then there's the random junk like the Snapchat fun filters, which is always front and center for some reason in the camera app, with all the other useful stuff like night mode and slow-mo and dual lens recording off to the side. Do I wish this phone had better zoom? Yes. You're gonna want to zoom in on something far away way more often than you'll ever take a super close-up picture of something with a macro lens. And the AI stuff I wish was on this phone, well, all the camera and photo editing stuff, that might have even made more people happy versus adding more lenses. But honestly, the A55 takes a great picture. It doesn't look the best in dim lighting or at night. That's where its budgetiness is revealed most. But even the most camera-focused individuals are probably going to feel this is a good enough setup for a sub-$400 phone. It's still not competition with a Pixel A or an iPhone, in my opinion, but it sits firmly outside the top 5 in the realm of smartphone camera rankings, just below most of the flagships. Noticeably better than the previous A series for sure, but not quite up to the caliber these smartphone manufacturers have been pushing the last few years. So where does Samsung go from here? Well, look, if Samsung wants people to stop buying this phone, they need to make their flagship phones better, or at least different or exciting in some way that motivates people to buy them. I truly don't know what that will end up being. Smartphones have absolutely gotten pretty stagnant the last couple of years, and outside the AI add-ons via software that are being pushed, this A55 is just not that much worse than what Samsung wants you to spend hundreds more on. I also don't think Samsung has to stop selling a phone like this one to one of its largest customer bases, the US, in order to get people to buy something else. They should just streamline their lineup. It's probably time to ditch the FE, honestly, and maybe just have like 3 A series phones and 3 S series phones, including the Ultra. That feels like enough for me. I mean, that's 6 phones to choose from already, and people can decide for themselves what they want. For now, though, I think Samsung is fighting a losing battle, and I suspect that either this A55 or the cheaper A35, and certainly the A15, will all outsell an S series or an FE phone that they're begging you to buy instead. But what do you guys think of the A55 this year? If you've been using it yourself for a while, definitely let me know your experience in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, or at least found it somewhat interesting. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.